Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, have you heard of King Yama?
No, I haven't. Where does he rule?
Supposedly samsara and the afterlife. I have read that he rules all the realms of samsara, and he ushers the newly dead to their new reincarnations based on their karmic history. He interrogates them and judges their actions while they live, and either exacts punishment on them in one of the narakas or rewards them in one of the heavens.
Fascinating. I must have seen him on some painting somewhere. Is he the character with the garland of fire, the wrathful facial expression, the 4 arms, and the 2 horns on his head?
That's him. He's also one of the wrathful deities charged with protecting the Dharma and its followers. He is one of many enlightened beings with knowledge of life and death, karma, and causation, who can help those who are good and punish those who are bad.
One could never know each and every one of the gods and deities in the realms of the Buddhas.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be discussing the Buddhist character King Yama. Who is King Yama? Where does he come from? And how does he fit into the system of karma and reincarnation? We hope you enjoy. So, who is King Yama?
King Yama is a character in the Hindu Vedas who was inherited into the Buddhist canon. We've seen this happen a lot before with other characters, and so this idea of Hindu deities being inherited into the Buddhist pantheon shouldn't be terribly new. King Yama is said to be the judge of the dead and is said to preside over the cycle of samsara, of rebirth and death. In the early Pali canon, before much of the death ritual and doctrine that we've discussed in previous episodes had developed, it was said that upon a person's death, each person would be subject to a line of questioning by King Yama. He would ask them about all of the bad deeds that they did during their lives, and if they had ever considered the karmic consequences of them, or if they had ever felt any remorse, or anything like that. And then he would send them to the appropriate naraka, or Buddhist hell realm. As I understand it now, modern Theravada Buddhists still believe in King Yama, and they regard things like disease, old age, and calamity to be sent by him to us as warnings to maintain good moral conduct and good behavior in this life. As Buddhism traveled to China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam from India, representations of King Yama changed in accordance with those places' existing indigenous religions. This is another case that we've seen before, such as in the case where Avalokiteshvara, the male bodhisattva of compassion, sort of transformed into Guanyin, the female bodhisattva of compassion, but also of mercy and of maternal love. In China, Yama blended with an existing god known as King Yan, who was the god of death and the underworld in Chinese folk religious traditions. What was important about this is that this elevated the status of Yama the character. Yan was the king of the 10 kings of hell, so Yama in Mahayana Buddhism came to be understood not just as the king of all hells, but as the king of all kings of all hells. When these beliefs migrated to Korea and Japan, they continued to be Mahayana Buddhist mainstays, at least in mythology and in imagery. In Korea, he is now known as Yom-la, and in Vietnam, he is known as Diem-la-Vuong, and in Japan, he's known as Enma. Yama enjoys a great deal of importance among Tibetan, Chinese, and Japanese esoteric Buddhist traditions, known as the Vajrayana traditions that we've discussed before, where he's regarded as one of the Dharmapalas. This is a type of wrathful god in Buddhism, which is a designated protector of the Buddha Dharma. These characters serve to protect the Dharma and followers of it from naysayers, from worldly dangers, from desire, from delusion and ignorance, and from any other enemies to their pursuit of the path of enlightenment. These gods are believed to be enlightened beings, and they are presented in imagery and statuary as very savage and vicious-looking characters with weapons and sharp teeth and angry eyes and other of the accoutrements of a violent character.
Where does he come from?
In the Vedic canon, Yama is the god of death, dharma, and the underworld. Remember that in the Hindu tradition, Dharma means something entirely different than it does in Buddhism. As we've discussed in detail with Buddhism, capital D Dharma refers to the Buddha's teaching, to absolute truth, to the way of things, etc. In Hinduism, it actually refers more to duty, to one's life calling, one's position in the world, the rights, the laws, the proper conduct, virtues, justice, etc. Much more, you might say, worldly issues and human-centric issues than the Buddhist variant. King Yama is responsible for issuing out this type of justice, this type of moral right, and this type of conduct to inhabitants of his realm. And in the Hindu tradition, his realm, again, is all of the reality that we occupy now. In the Hindu tradition, his realm is also just one singular hell instead of multiple hells. And that hell itself is called Naraka. Naraka is a difficult term that we've discussed before, and it's difficult because it can be applied to one place, as in the Hindu tradition, or in some Buddhist traditions, or it can refer to a category of different places, which we've seen in the late Buddhist tradition in particular. So the definition of this word depends a lot on context and on which tradition that you're working with and talking about. Interestingly, Yama also appears in Sikh and Zoroastrian mythology. These are two other Central Asian religions which have developed alongside Buddhism. Sikhism was founded in the 16th century, and Zoroastrianism has existed in Central Asia and the Middle East dating back as far as 2000 BC. We won't get too deep into the philosophy and doctrine of these other religions, but it's just interesting to see that King Yama pervades not only among the Hindu tradition, but these traditions as well.
How does King Yama fit into the system of karma and reincarnation?
In the early tradition, Yama was essentially thought to be the judge of the dead, like Osiris in Egyptian mythology. As we discussed before, whenever somebody would pass away, King Yama would subject them to a line of questioning about their actions in life and about their moral regrets and transgressions, and judge them accordingly. In order to do this completely and properly, he has basic knowledge of samsara and everything in it, and he has complete knowledge of every person's karma, every sentient being's karmic history and past. Knowing this, he determines one's reincarnation and delivers them to it. Because he knows everybody's karmic history, we can say that he is an enlightened being. Remember that we've discussed before that the enlightenment category falls upon those who are completely knowledgeable of everyone's karmic past, present, and future, where they are going, where they are, etc.
Omniscience.
Omniscience, exactly. Later, after the development of King Yama and as Mahayana Buddhism developed in East Asia, different death rituals and doctrines have developed, and we've talked about these at some length. And Yama then became sort of localized, in the sense that there are still those out there that believe in his existence and in his presidency over the underworld and over this world, but there are also in other places those that believe other things. For example, the Pure Land tradition is quite popular in Japan now, and there are other death traditions that are popular in most of China. However, you'll still find there are some temples and some schools of Buddhism that, if they don't do rituals that directly involve King Yama, they will still include him in imagery of samsara and in mandalas in particular. This imagery in mandalas happens primarily in the esoteric Buddhist traditions. We've talked before about how mandala is one of the three practices that the esoteric Buddhists do, including mantra and mudra. Mandalas are imagery that are meant to depict a certain realm and make real that realm in this realm. And so, including King Yama in that imagery acknowledges that they believe that he's real and presides over the realm that they're depicting. There's very famous imagery dating back a very, very long time, way into the early strata, where he presides and holds onto the wheel of samsara, including the 6 realms. So his imagery dates back even before the 10 realms doctrine that we've talked about in the past, which was a relatively newer development in Mahayana Buddhism as opposed to the 6 realms doctrine. He also pervades in proverbs and in common sayings and everyday culture more than in any beliefs about where people go when they die and how they get there. For example, When Japanese parents are telling their children not to lie, they'll sometimes say the phrase, uso o tsukeba, enma-sama ni shita o nukareru, which means if you lie, King Enma will pull out your tongue. There are other such sayings in East Asia that include King Yama as a character that we won't go too far into because they start to move further away from Buddhism, but they still exist and he's still a known character. If someone says Enma-sama in Japan, then pretty good chance that people will know who that is. Same if you say his Chinese name, King Yan, or if you say the Korean name, etc.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode about King Yama. Join us next week where we will discuss a bit of Buddhist cosmology. What is Buddhist cosmology? How does that play out in ritual and practice? How does it change over time? We hope to see you there. Thank you for listening.
See you next time. Thank you for listening.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and the voice of Huru.
And I'm Docs, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com. Tweet us at brightbuddhism. And join us on our Discord server, the Hidden Sangha, link in description. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you very much.